prime time for Jesus. He had just gotten the word just now that John the Baptist had been beheaded. We've heard of beheadings recently in the news, and you know that kind of chill that we all feel in our gut when we hear that's happened to somebody we don't know. What if you guessed that if it happened to this guy, it was likely that you too would face a similar death? That's what Jesus must have felt. He also was grieving his kinsman. And so he got into the boat. He said to the disciples, "Take me off someplace where I can have a little time alone." He needed to grieve. He needed to pray. And so that's what he set out to do. But when he got to the other side of the lake, the people had heard he was coming. When they pulled to the shore, there they all are, waiting for him. And it says Jesus had compassion on them. That is, the Greek word really says he gave himself over to the crowd. And in so doing, he cured their sick. He made them whole. Even in this time of grief, fatigue, and worry, he gave them what he had to give. He made them whole. He cured their sick. When the day was spent, when evening had come, the disciples came to Jesus and they said, "This is a lonesome place. Send the people away. Send them back home so that they can go and get something to eat." And he said to them, "You don't have to go. You give them something." I don't know about you, but I feel for the disciples at that point. You give them something to eat. Here's a crowd of 5,000 men, plus women and children. You give them something to eat. And the disciples said, "We've got nothing. We've got nothing but these 5 little loaves and a couple of little fish. We've got nothing to feed 5,000 people." And Jesus does what God often does. He says, "Bring me your nothing. Bring it to me. What do you got?" And he blesses and prays and breaks the bread and gives it over to the disciples and says, "Disperse it." And the people were fed. They were all fed. They were all satisfied. Jesus took their nothing and created something. He changed it by his Spirit, by his prayer. He changed it and made it a blessing that would feed them in body and soul, and the people were satisfied. They were filled. And it says that not only were they filled, not only was there enough, but there was a bunch left over. 12 baskets full. We're not talking picnic baskets here. We're talking these big baskets that you would use at harvest time. That was as tall as a man that went over your shoulder, filled, overflowing with grace of God. It's a wonderful story. I really identify with this story. I identify with this story as soon as he turns to the disciples and says, "You give them something to eat." Because, see, that's what the church is charged with. That's what pastors are charged with. Very specifically, that's what the preacher is charged with. You give them something to eat. And I immediately thought to myself, how many times I have said just what the disciple says, "I got nothing. I got nothing." And God, again and again, has said to me, "Bring me your nothing." And he begins to do it. Now, it goes all the way back to the story of creation. At the very beginning, God created the heavens and earth out of nothing. We're we're told that the world was formless and void, and God filled that void with His Spirit. He created the heavens and the earth and all of the creatures, and you and me. He took our nothing and He filled it with His Spirit. And that Spirit lives out in us down until today. I got nothing, I said. And God comes to me and begins to give me a little bit. Helps me along. Helps me find a way. Bring me your nothing. You know, I'm at the end now, and this is the time where you begin to look back in a lot of different ways. And I remember when I first started feeling that call to ministry. I was a teenager. I was pretty young teenager, I think, when I first thought about it, and I did not embrace the idea. I fled from the idea. I mean, the idea of standing in front of a whole bunch of people and speaking, having an odd collar on, makes you look different. That was not what I intended for my life. And so for years, literally for years, I turned in different directions, trying not to take up that call, but it kept coming to me. And at some point, I found myself at seminary. I thought it was a clerical error that would get cleared up, but it never did. But as I entertained that call, as I struggled with that possibility, I kept thinking, I got nothing. I'm not a speaker. I was so reticent. My personality is to be an introvert. Wasn't good with people. I got anxious about just reading in front of church. And just knowing I was going to say that today, I was anxious reading the gospel today, which is unusual. I still today, though, am amazed every week that people will listen to my sermon, because it is just so contrary to the personality that I grew up with. And I said to God, I got nothing. This is an error. And God said, give me your nothing. And He began to work. And somebody said to me, you know, if you're not a good speaker, that's okay. If you're a good company. Moses said, I am not a good speaker when he was called to the ministry. And God gave him Aaron to speak for him. He didn't give me Aaron. He gave me Alice, though. And she taught me so much, you know, because she was good with people. She was easy with people. She could work a crowd. Whereas I wanted to go into the corner and wait until this big meeting was over. And so I watched her, and I trailed her wait for a time. And I learned gradually to deal with people. Give me your nothing. And gradually, I began to learn. In my first parish, down Shiloh Lutheran Church in North Carolina, I said to them, I will never intone the service or sing the service. I don't sing. And then in my second parish, I learned how long never is. Because when I became senior pastor there, it became clear to me that they would like for me to learn to sing the service. And I began to try to do that. It was not pretty at first. I remember well my first time that I intoned the liturgy, sang the liturgy. And, you know, the faithful are great at giving me positive feedback. And one of them was waiting for me at the door of the church that day and said to me, in a most caring fashion, do us and yourself a favor and never do that again. And that's exactly what I wanted to do, never to do that again. But it seemed to me clear that I needed to learn. And gradually, I learned. I gave my nothing over at that point, and gradually gave me back something of what I needed. See, I share these stories with you because it seems to me that's how God works with us again and again. We give our nothing over to Him. And it doesn't happen in the snap of a finger, at least it didn't for me. But He works with us. He takes our nothing and makes something of it that will be beneficial. I share this story with you this day because I think many of us come to the church each week feeling, I got nothing. I got all kind of worries. I got all kind of problems. I have no answers. I have no direction. I'm uncertain about tomorrow. I got nothing. But here in this place, as we hear the stories, and as we come forward to the sacrament, God takes our nothing and makes it into something. He begins to build in us. He takes that void within us and He fills it with His Spirit. He takes our nothing and makes something. He raises us. As we come to the table of grace in Holy Communion, He throws His arms around us. Says, know of my love. Know that I love you enough to forgive you. Let me pick you up from your confusion, from your weary, from your wondering, and help you to know you are not alone, that I am with you, that I love you, that I will be with you, and bring to you direction. I will take your nothing and make it something. See, that's what we're called. That's what we experience here. God feeds us in a wondrous way. Just like that day as He met the crowd and fed the 5,000 and more with a few morsels of bread and a couple of little fish. See, in Matthew, that's the precursor for Holy Communion. That's what He does with us here. He takes these little morsels of bread that we have, that tiny bit of wine, and He feeds us. And He fills our nothingness with His Spirit. And He says, arise. Let me go with you out into life this week. Let me help you to know the love of God. And let me help you to share that love